Hello, and welcome to the first panel of the 31st Annual Animal Law Conference. Yay, we're here. For those of you in the room, it's great to see you. For those joining us virtually, it's wonderful to have you with us. I'm Joyce Tischler, founder of ALDF and professor of practice at the Center for Animal Law Studies. And I'm pleased to be moderating this panel titled Animal Agribusiness Exposed, Harming Animals, Communities, and the Environment. And each of our panelists will address one of these harms. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. I want to offer a special thank you to our gold sponsor, Stray Dog Institute, for sponsoring this session. Let's give them a hand. The Animal Law Conference has been approved for 15 CLE credits, including one ethics credit by the California State Bar Association. Conference organizers will be in touch via email after the conference with information for attorneys who wish to secure their credits. And California attorneys, be sure to stop by the registration table during this weekend to sign the MCLE attendance record. For those who are joining us virtually, you can submit questions via the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And for those who are in person, we'll be using two microphones. I don't know where, there they are. Okay, that one and that one. And we'll ask you to queue up behind the microphones when it's time for Q&A. We have three presenters for this panel. You only see two of us. The third one's hiding. Two of us are here on stage. Jamie Berger will join us through a pre-recorded presentation, and then we'll take questions from you. And now I'm going to start. So cover slide. Oh, cover slide is up there. Beautiful cow. Yay. Okay. I'm going to be offering updates on current federal legislation in the United States Congress that could significantly impact farmed animals. And I'm going to give you a term now, and you're going to hear it throughout: concentrated animal feeding operations. For those of you who are studying environmental law, that's familiar. Concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, otherwise known as factory farms, big ag, whatever you want to call them. The global production of meat, dairy, and eggs coming from non-human animals is estimated to be worth trillions of dollars. And I refer to the system as CAFOs. There are other ways to measure the size and the power of the CAFO industry, but any way you look at it, we are involved in an enormous long-term battle to create change that will protect animals and reduce or replace animal-based meat, dairy, and egg consumption. In other words, this is big, multifaceted. We win some battles, we lose others, because we have nowhere near the funding, the staffing, or the political power that big ag does, so we have to fight smart. I'm going to address a few of the bills that are currently in Congress. Earlier this year, Senator Cory Booker introduced a package of bills. He sits on the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. And this package of bills is intended to bring much needed reform to the U.S. CAFO food production system. So hang on, my technological skills. Yes, I did it. Okay. The Industrial Agriculture Accountability Act of 2023, Senate Bill 272, HR 805, disasters are happening increasingly. Some of you may have noticed, and they're brought on by climate change. And climate change is impacted by the CAFO system. When these occur, these disasters, such as flooding in North Carolina, the CAFO producers close the barn door, walk away, and let the animals drown. Or they depopulate using the most painful methods that cause hours of suffering before the animals actually die. They write it off for insurance purposes, no remorse. It's a cost of doing business. The Industrial Animal Agriculture Accountability Act would shift the liability for responsible disaster mitigation onto the shoulders of Big Ag. It would require the CAFO producers to draft and submit disaster preparedness plans. They'd also have to pay a fee for a newly established high-risk AFO disaster mitigation fund, which will enforce disaster mitigation plans and ensure that if depopulation is absolutely necessary, only the most humane practices will be allowed rather than the horrific practices that they use now, such as ventilation shutdown or suffocation from water-based foam. This bill would stop the USDA's current cruel practice of continually increasing line speeds at which animals can be slaughtered. It would and the USDA has also been allowing the slaughterhouses to replace USDA inspectors with their own staff. The bill would end the slaughter of all downed animals. It would require more humane treatment of livestock during transport, which would be going from zero to something. Finally, it would invest in technology that would make slaughter more humane in meat and poultry slaughterhouses. And I question whether slaughter can ever be made humane, but I applaud Cory Booker for trying. The bill mandates that the U.S. Department of Labor will enforce minimum labor standards for workers in slaughterhouses. We all remember during COVID where the workers in slaughterhouses were coming down with COVID at high rates. Why? Because they weren't given protection. They were shoulder to shoulder and COVID was spreading. There will also be whistleblower protections and health insurance requirements. And CAFO producers may not use incarcerated people, prisoners, to work in disaster or depopulating events. The bill's endorsed by a long list of animal protection, environmental, and family farm and food safety groups. Hang on, next. Okay. The Farm, do I have the right slide? Yeah, I actually do. The Farm System Reform Act, SB 271 and HR 797 is another of Cory Booker's package. And in my opinion, the most important thing it would do is place an immediate moratorium on the construction of new CAFOs or the expansion of existing CAFOs. And it would phase out existing large CAFOs, factory farms, by 2041. That would be a dream come true. This bill is supported by over 300 national, state, and local organizations, which have communicated their support to the House and the Senate. The third bill is protecting America's meatpacking. Sorry, it's hard for me to see it there. Yeah, okay. Meatpacking workers, Senate 270, HR 798. It's aimed at correcting the horrible working conditions that slaughterhouse workers currently endure. Working with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which we know as OSHA, it would improve workplace safety and health requirements. It would expand protections for these workers, and it's endorsed by a long list of labor organizations as well as animal protection, environmental, and small family farmer groups. And the final piece of this groundbreaking reform package is the Justice for Black Farmers Act, Senate Bill 96, HR 1167. The USDA has for too long discriminated against Black farmers and ranchers, denying them federal aid and stripping them of their land. And this bill would establish within the USDA a new body called the Department of Agriculture Civil Rights Oversight Board. It would be an independent board with the power to investigate and act on reports of discrimination within the agency and protect the rights of complainants. This board would also conduct regular reviews to assess compliance by the USDA with applicable civil rights, fair employment, and pay equity laws. The board would recommend improvements to the USDA and issue an annual report that would go to the U.S. Attorney General as well as be available to the public. And that kind of transparency would be very helpful in trying to correct a longstanding problem. So each of these bills is really interesting. It's forward thinking. It's the kind of thing you'd expect from Cory Booker. And if passed, Any or all of these bills would have a positive effect on protecting farmed animals imprisoned in the CAFO system, as well as humans who are negatively impacted by the CAFO system, as well as the environment. This would be a good thing. The problem is that these bills seem to have stalled. They don't seem to be going anywhere in Congress, and they're unlikely to become law if they can't go through committees and get votes. So they won't create the positive change that we'd like them to create. Even worse news, sorry, starting the day off with even worse news. Yeah, and that's the Ending Agriculture Trade Suppression Act, or the EATS Act. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it, but to understand what the EATS Act is and how it came about, we need to do a little bit of review, and that leads us to California Prop 12. Over the past 20 years, animal advocates have been really working hard and have been successful at getting state-level bans on some of the most egregious and worst forms of animal confinement in U.S. CAFOs. By that, I mean egg-laying hens in battery cages, calves in tiny cages, and sows in sow gestation crates. I'm going to assume that everybody in this audience is familiar with Prop 12. I've put up a slide for those who are not. Prop 12 was approved by the California voters in 2018, and it prohibits intensive confinement of calves, breeding pigs, who are called sows, and egg-laying hens, unless they're given a specific number of square feet of space. It also bans the in-state sale of veal from calves, pork from sows, and shelled and liquid eggs from egg-laying hens when those animals are confined to areas below the minimum square foot requirements. What got Prop 12 in hot water is that it not only affects California producers, it also demands change from out-of-state producers. The National Pork Producers Council and the American Farm Bureau Federation sued California, and I'm sure people have heard about that lawsuit. It made its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court in May of 2023. A very sharply divided court issued what has been referred to as a fractured opinion, which upheld Prop 12, but just barely. The next thing that happened was that in June of 2023, Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas and Representative Ashley Hinson from Iowa — Iowa is the top pork producing state in the United States — they introduced the Ending Agricultural Trade Suppression, or EATS Act, Senate Bill 2019, HR 4417. The EATS Act is a major threat to all that we have worked for in the past 20 years. And if passed, I'm not overstating it, it will be a disaster for farmed animals. The text of the EATS Act is here. I won't read it to you. I'll read a little. The prohibition is the government of a state or unit of local government within a state shall not impose a standard on the pre-harvest production of any agricultural products sold or offered for sale in interstate commerce. In other words, what the EATS Act does is essentially override any state law like Prop 12 or Massachusetts Question 3 that regulates agricultural products, i.e. animal flesh, animal dairy, eggs, within the state's borders. It will prevent states from impeding agricultural trade from other states. But it would do even more than that, actually. The EATS Act will prohibit states from banning the sale of agricultural products on cruelty grounds. It would maintain the stranglehold that big ag companies have had traditionally in this country. These companies exist and make huge profits because they can cheaply and inhumanely raise farmed animals with very little space indoors and with very little regard to the suffering that they're causing to those animals. Every national animal protection group is working hard to defeat the EATS Act because it's going to undo all the progress that we have made. If passed, the EATS Act will overturn California Prop 12 and Mass Question 3, as I mentioned, but it's also going to overturn laws that ban the sale of foie gras, which is derived from cruelly force-feeding ducks and geese. It will overturn laws that say that eggs from hens raised in battery cages cannot be sold. It'll even impact cosmetics testing. A recent report issued by the Harvard Animal Law and Policy Program warns that passage of the EATS Act could have widespread negative consequences on more than 1,000 state and local public health and safety regulations. So this goes way beyond the animals. As it could also impact state laws on food safety, narcotics, labeling regulations, and other regulations. Hundreds of veterinary professionals have expressed their concern that the EATS Act would violate their oath to prevent animal suffering. Interestingly, producers in Pennsylvania have stated that they've already made significant efforts to meet Prop 12 standards, and the EATS Act would actually harm them. That's good news. Some Republican lawmakers are unhappy about the EATS Act, stating that it is at odds with our foundational Republican principles of states' rights, national sovereignty, and fair competition. But the EATS Act is very much alive. Don't think we've won. We have not come near to winning in opposing this bill. It may pass unless we continue to create a groundswell of opposition. The EATS Act has received massive support from big ag groups such as the National Pork Producers Council and the American Farm Bureau Federation. They were the plaintiffs in the case against California. I'll give you a quote from Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa. He said, the goal of the EATS Act is to, quote, reverse the effects of Proposition 12. Grassley doesn't care about the suffering of farmed animals. He doesn't care that sows spend their entire lives in what effectively is a coffin. They can't walk, they can't turn around. These are intelligent animals who need so much more. He cares about supporting the profits of big ag in Iowa. He wants to ensure that, in his words, Iowa pork can be sold everywhere in the nation and beyond, I'm sure. The sponsors of the EATS Act are trying to ram it through as part of the 2023 Farm Bill. They're talking about narrowing it so that they can reduce some of the opposition. But even if they narrow it, it's going to focus on Prop 12 and on helpful animal legislation. The Farm Bill is an omnibus bill that's passed every 5 years. It's massive. It's a 1,000-page bill, and you can hide a lot of stuff in it. So we need to really be on our watch to make sure that this doesn't go through as part of the Farm Bill. So I just want to leave you with this. The most important action you can take, and if you don't do anything else this year, I beg you to please do this. Right now, contact your federal legislators, senators, and representatives, and ask them to oppose the EATS Act, oppose it going into the Farm Bill or individually, in the interest of protecting animals and humans from harmful big ag practices. Thank you. And now I'm going to pass the baton to Christine Ball-Blakely. Christine is a senior staff attorney at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. She works to end systemic exploitation and abuse of farmed animals by using environmental laws. And she works to hold animal agriculture responsible and government agencies responsible for regulating it and keeping it accountable. She believes that together we can build a just legal system that prioritizes the protection of animals, the environment, and communities, offering over private profit. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Joyce. Talk about a hard act to follow. I will do my best. Good morning, everybody. I'm super excited to be here today to talk with you about the great gaslight, greenwashing industrial animal agriculture. Before I dive in, I just want to point out that all of the views and opinions that I express today are mine personally and do not represent those of the Animal Legal Defense Fund or our clients. I'm not going to lie to you. I have a lot of content that I'm trying to cram into 20 minutes, so bear with me. So in the interest of keeping you in the loop as I go along, I put together a quick roadmap. First, I'm going to talk about industrial animal agriculture and why it is never, ever sustainable and never will be. Then I'll talk about greenwashing generally, kind of an introduction to that concept. And then I'll go through a few examples of what it looks like in the industrial animal agriculture scene. And then finally, in the interest of leaving you with something positive, I'm going to talk a little bit about some advocacy that's going on to challenge this kind of greenwashing in the industry. Okay, so I don't think this is news to any of you. This is a factory farm or a CAFO, as Joyce defined. So these are basically just sites where hundreds, thousands, or even millions of animals are crammed into a small space. These cows, as you can see, are standing on dirt. They will probably never touch grass in their entire lives. And the way these things work is that their waste is collected and put into giant cesspools in the ground. So basically dig a hole, throw all the waste in there. And then even though sometimes they're the size of football fields, they do get full. And so when that happens, then the factory farms basically spray that manure on fields called spray fields. This is called the lagoon and spray field system, and it's extremely devastating to the environment. So according to Food and Water Watch, 14,000 miles of rivers and streams in the United States are impaired by factory farm pollution, and 90,000 acres of lakes and ponds are impaired by factory farm pollution. In addition to harming the environment and the animals who live in or otherwise rely on these waterways, this pollution is also very, very dangerous to humans. It contains nitrates, ammonia, and many other pollutants, and it also contains over 150 parasites, bacteria, and viruses that cause disease and infection. The photo that you see on the screen right now came from a public records request to the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And this is basically a photo of what happened when a dairy factory farm discharged manure to a nearby creek and river, causing, as it says beneath the photo there, islands of solid manure. Unfortunately, despite all of this dangerous pollution, EPA and other regulatory agencies have severely underregulated factory farm water pollution, leaving factory farms free to continue polluting. And factory farms also emit dangerous air pollution, including ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, volatile organic compounds, and fine particulate matter. This pollution harms local air quality and is very dangerous for human health. Studies show that communities occupied by factory farms disproportionately suffer serious health effects from these air pollutants, including things like chronic lung disease. As this image depicts, one recent study found that air pollution from animal agriculture is responsible for 12,700 deaths in the United States every single year. And that's not all. Factory farms are also fueling the climate crisis by producing short-lived climate pollutants like methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas, more than 25 times more potent at trapping heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide over a 100-year period. And don't be fooled by this chart. The animal agriculture industry is actually the #1 source of methane in the United States. By looking at the chart, you might think it's oil and gas. But if you look on the left, you'll see that 10% is manure management. And then on the bottom right, 27% is enteric fermentation. Those emissions result from the animals themselves through their digestive process. So together, these comprise 37% of methane emissions in the United States. The climate crisis is an existential threat for animals and humans alike. We're currently in the 6th mass extinction due to the climate crisis. And despite stakes that could truly not be higher, EPA and other regulatory agencies ignore factory farm air and climate pollution. And factory farm air pollution also hurts the farmed animals themselves because they have to breathe the air around them. And the methane itself is incredibly dangerous and explosive. This is a factory farm called South Fork Dairy, and it's located in Dimmitt, Texas, and it exploded and burned last spring. Tragically, 20,000 cows died and 1 worker was injured. It was the largest and worst barn fire in history. The resulting investigation determined that a manure hauler, which is just a piece of equipment, sparked the fire that caused the explosion. But a building with this many cows in it, 20,000 cows in one single building, was bound to be absolutely filled with methane, which, as the quote above mentions, is highly flammable. And environmental injustice. This is a big one also, and you'll learn more about that later on in this panel. But industrial animal agriculture hurts communities that are occupied by factory farms, which are disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and other people of color communities and low-income communities. Again, despite this and all of the other reasons to regulate factory farm pollution, EPA and other regulatory bodies have failed to do so. And why? Because the industry has a powerful stranglehold on the agencies that exist to regulate it. So let's talk about greenwashing. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about what it is generally, but I liked this definition of it. Greenwashing is essentially when corporations try to do what they can to appear environmentally friendly. And the reasons that they do this are to fool consumers into feeling good about consuming, purchasing their products. They like to look good. It's basically a marketing ploy. Jay Westerveld was an environmentalist and an ecologist who coined the term greenwashing in 1986. And on your screen is an example of the kind of greenwashing that was going on in the mid-1980s. This is from Chevron, and the panel on the left there you can see is about a butterfly preserve. Well, Chevron cost Chevron about $5,000 to run this butterfly preserve, but they spent millions promoting it in ads. So also at the same time Chevron ran these ads, it was violating the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and spilling oil into wildlife refuges. So that's an example of greenwashing. Remember Chevron, because they'll be back in this presentation. So one example of greenwashing in industrial animal agriculture is fake family farms. And as this example shows, I think quite poignantly, greenwashing and humane washing often go hand in hand. This is a screenshot of the Tillamook County Creamery Association's website. Clearly, Tillamook wants all of us to believe that its products are coming from family farms with happy cows, but nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, we know that more than 2/3 of the products that Tillamook sells actually comes from 3 Mile Canyon Farms, which is the biggest dairy factory farm in the United States. It's located in Boardman, Oregon, which is in the eastern portion of the state. It combines nearly 70,000 cows and sprawls across 93,000 acres, more than 3 times the area of San Francisco. Tillamook's annual revenue has topped $1 billion, so not exactly a small family farm. Now let's talk about factory farm biogas. Here is an example of what this looks like. This is an ad from Chevron. Told you we would be seeing those again. They are still using animals and exploiting animals to greenwash their products, as you can see. This time they're making kind of 2 moves with this, I think. The first is to say that cows are actually sources of clean and green energy through factory farm biogas, which is pretty, I think, pretty dystopian if you think about it, because we're talking about using and exploiting animals not only for food now, but also for energy. And it's also not true. It's not clean or green, and I'll explain more about why that is in a moment. But I think another move that they're making is saying that they're implying, if not stating, that their natural gas products are renewable. And even if we assumed that factory farm biogas was clean and green and renewable and all of that, which it absolutely is not, their portfolio is comprised, the vast majority of their natural gas is fossil natural gas, the same as it always was. So again, we see Chevron trying to use this to make themselves look greener than they are. Here are some unfortunate headlines in an ad. These headlines are all saying how factory farm biogas is fighting climate change. This ad at the top left is for a brand of milk that is claiming to be 100% carbon neutral. So now that we know what it looks like, now that we know what greenwashing through factory farm biogas looks like, how it appears in the world, I want to talk a little bit about why it's not green at all. So factory farm biogas is basically just captured gases that are produced by anaerobically decomposing manure, mainly methane and carbon dioxide. You may have also heard it called biogas or biomethane or renewable natural gas, but basically it's all the same thing. It's just different levels of refinement, and that accounts for the differences in terms. If you look on the screen there, you can see the manure goes into the digester, and then the digester produces kind of 2 products. One is biogas, which can be combusted for fuel. The other is digestate, and that's kind of the manure stuff that's left over. The reason it's not just called manure is that it's chemically different after the digestion process occurs, and so it's called digestate, and it is, I'll explain why it's different in a moment, but it's not the same thing as manure anymore. However, one thing is the same as manure, and that is that they have to spread this on fields to get rid of it. So even though, we have this different process, it's still going to end up on the fields. This is one kind of methane digester. It's round and cylindrical, very big. This is another kind. It's basically a glorified tarp put over one of those giant cesspools that I spoke of before. This is on a manure lagoon / cesspool. We really shouldn't call them lagoons, in the Central Valley in California. So there are a lot of problems with methane digesters. I want to talk a little bit about the problems with those specifically, and then I'll also touch on the problems with the system surrounding the production of factory farm biogas in a moment. So first of all, they don't address a lot of the things that are bad about factory farming. They don't address animal cruelty. They don't address water pollution. And in fact, they might actually make it worse. They don't address environmental injustice. The digestate, as I mentioned, it actually has higher levels of nitrous oxide and ammonia than manure, raw manure. And that's important because ammonia is a really horrible air pollutant, and it can make air quality at the local level very, very bad. Nitrous oxide is more powerful as a greenhouse gas than methane. So this is not good. So basically what this means is that we're really not even sure that methane digesters do the one thing that they purport to do, which is reduce emissions. They also are very expensive to install. They cost like $5 million to install a methane digester, which is, obviously the largest factory farms are the ones getting these things. They require the use of liquefied manure management, which is kind of a race to the bottom because, as I said before, that's never, ever going to be sustainable. It just can't be. So it's really entrenching the worst parts of factory farming. They can also leak manure and emissions, and they can even explode. And here's what that looks like. This happened last year over in North Carolina. The black balloon looking thing kind of in the background there that's billowing, that is the digester. So basically it tore and the waste just went everywhere, as you can see in this photo. It also went into a neighboring wetland and waterway, and it was about 3 million gallons that leaked out. So very, very bad. I do have some good news on this front. This just happened this week. I'm very excited to share it. Sound Rivers, which is a North Carolina environmental organization, sent a notice of intent to sue under the Clean Water Act and the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and they're being represented by the Southern Environmental Law Center. So keep an eye on that, and best of luck to them. There are also a lot of problems with factory farm biogas production more broadly. And really, if you think about this, it's basically the oil and gas industry kind of joining into an unholy alliance with the factory farming industry. Both of these industries use this product to greenwash their business practices, and it's really just, it's been a real boon for them. Another problem is it has to be combusted. So factory farm gas, like I mentioned before, it's not like it's just being taken out of the atmosphere and going away. It has to be combusted and burned. So it still does pollute. It also has to be processed to be used for most purposes, including transportation. So there are refineries for factory farm gas. And then it requires the fossil natural gas infrastructure, including things like pipelines, in order to transport it. And these are horrible for the environment and animals and communities as well. So we're kind of seeing like I said, a doubling down or an entrenching of the systems that are already in place that are so very harmful. And the oil companies love it. I mean, they love it. The agriculture industry loves it. It's just the best of both worlds for them. They get to keep doing what they've been doing, destroying the environment, harming animals and communities, while trying to, basically say, well, we're nice and green now. And they're also using this to get subsidies to keep propping up things like pipelines. So there's a bunch of subsidies that go into making this so very lucrative for factory farm gas producers, including factory farms. There are capital costs that cover that $5 million, or subsidies that cover the capital costs. So, it's not like a factory farm is going to be shelling out $5 million to install a digester. There are federal and state programs that help with that through USDA and the California Department of Food and Agriculture. But then the really lucrative part comes from pollution trading schemes like EPA's renewable fuel standard or California's low carbon fuel standard. These give factory farm gas producers credits to produce factory farm gas. So they are not regulated, but then they get to sell these credits that they get for producing factory farm gas and make a killing off of it. So this is really why it's so very profitable to produce factory farm gas. There are also some tax credits, and just one example is the ones that were included in the Inflation Reduction Act. Here are some headlines that are at least honest. This is truly what this is about. There's a manure gold rush because of these subsidies. So what does this mean? This means that if you have a factory farm, you want to make as much manure as you can. You can just start profiting off of the manure as well as the primary product that you're making, be it meat or dairy or whatever. And so it's creating huge expansion, consolidation, entrenchment of horribly damaging practices. And at least these headlines are saying the quiet part out loud. The final example of greenwashing in industrial animal agriculture that I'd like to touch on is animal drugs and food additives. So a few moments ago, I showed you that pie chart of methane emission sources. And as you probably recall, enteric emissions were 27% and manure management was only 10%. So the industry knows it has to figure out a way to address enteric emissions. It knows it has to, because factory farm biogas is never going to be able to solve that problem. So it's decided that drugs and feed additives are the way to go with this. And this is unfortunate because the truth is that industrial animal ag can never, ever be sustainable, even with this stuff. And that's, instead of reducing scale, cutting back on factory farming and animal products, they're doubling down, entrenching their worst possible business practices and trying to out-tech, I guess, the rest of us, and trying to make us believe that all this tech is working and that we don't need to worry about the environmental impacts of factory farming anymore. There are even companies already advertising climate-friendly beef. There's one up there in the corner. But again, there's one major problem with this plan, and that is that, like digesters, there's really no reason to think that these things actually work. I'd like to talk about an animal drug called Experior as an example of this. This is a drug that FDA approved in 2018 for use in cows raised for beef. And it's a great example of how the industry uses animal drugs and feed additives to greenwash. It was approved to reduce ammonia emissions from beef cows and their waste, but there's no evidence that it works in real world conditions, which is of course where the cows are on feedlots. Experior is a beta agonist, which is the same class of drug as ractopamine, which you may have heard about. This class of drugs are used to cause rapid weight gain in farmed animals, although Experior was not approved for that. These drugs are known to be dangerous to human and non-human animals alike. Experior has been shown to raise the body temperature of cows, increasing their risk of heat stroke, especially in drought-prone areas like the desert. And beta agonists are also linked to heat and respiratory issues in consumers and farm workers. Okay, enough about all the sad stuff. Let's talk about something happy. There are a lot of good fights going on in this space right now, and they just need to keep going. I'll tell you just a little bit about a few of them. This is by no means exhaustive. The first one I want to talk about is a case that the Animal Legal Defense Fund spearheaded, and this was brought by my brilliant colleague, Amanda Howell. It's pending before the Oregon Supreme Court right now. As we discussed previously, Tillamook County Creamery Association greenwashes and humane washes its brand by misrepresenting that its products are sourced from pasture-based, small-scale family farms when they're actually mostly sourced from the biggest dairy factory farm in the United States. This case is a class action filed under Oregon's consumer protection laws on behalf of a class of Oregon consumers. ALDF was part of a coalition recently that filed a petition for rulemaking to remove factory farm biogas from California's low carbon fuel standard. This petition argued a lot of things. It's very complex, but one I think of the most interesting arguments is that CARB's life cycle analysis of factory farm biogas, which basically assesses its carbon intensity or how green it is really, really flawed. So basically they're cooking the books to make it look greener than it actually is. It's actually not green, as you might imagine. It takes, for example, the manure cesspools as pre-existing natural occurrences. So it just assumes that these lagoons or cesspools that the industry has obviously intentionally created, it just takes those as naturally occurring. That's the baseline. It also ignores upstream and downstream emissions, including enteric emissions, which, as we know, are a huge proportion of methane emissions. And unfortunately, this petition was denied, and so was the petition for reconsideration. But in the denial, they said to us that they would look at these things again once they entered into rulemaking to amend the low carbon fuel standard. Well, that's happening right now. So we are engaged in that regulatory process and trying to hold them accountable, not only for the life cycle issue that I mentioned, but also a bunch of other problems, including environmental justice impacts. So their program, like I said, is it's increasing consolidation and expansion, especially in areas that are already overburdened with pollution, like the Central Valley of California. There's also some other regulatory advocacy that I wanted to flag for you all. I'm not going to read all of these, but the Animal Legal Defense Fund did file comments urging the Federal Trade Commission to update the green guides. And this would basically just be an effort to ban sustainability claims on animal products, which would be very helpful, obviously. We also filed comments on EPA's renewable fuel standard rulemaking that happened recently. This is very similar to the low carbon fuel standard efforts that we're making in California, basically encouraging the agency not to let factory farms profit from basically these programs are intended to reduce the impacts of the climate crisis, and this isn't doing it. it's kind of just a big scam. And so we're urging them to remove factory farm gas from that program as well. And finally, one other piece of litigation to discuss. This is a case spearheaded by my brilliant colleagues, Larissa Liebman and Christina Cladis, and my brilliant former colleague, Christina Stella. It is currently pending before the Northern District of California. And this case is challenging that government-sanctioned greenwashing from the FDA that I kind of alluded to in a previous slide about Experior. This case is against the FDA for approving the use of Experior. And this, as I said, this drug is, purports to control ammonia emissions from cows used for beef. But this case asserts that the FDA violated the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act and the National Environmental Policy Act when it approved Experior, because FDA had insufficient information to determine that the drug is safe for animals and also for consumers. This case is, currently cross motions for summary judgment have been filed and argued, and we're just waiting for a decision. So fingers crossed. And again, huge shout out to Christina Cladis and Larissa Liebman for handling this case, because it's very, very complicated. And I had to ask them a million questions to even talk about it today. So thank you. And here's some resources and further info if you're interested in learning more about any of these topics. And you can also email me if you have questions that you think of later that you don't want to ask today. Thank you.
So what we've been trying to do with this panel is show you the many ways in which CAFOs negatively impact not only the animals, but human beings, the people who work there, the people who are forced to live near these places, the impacts on antibiotic overuse. I mean, the impacts are very broad. They also give us the opportunity to attack the CAFO system and work with our colleagues from other fields to attack the CAFO system. The next thing that we're going to show you is a short trailer for a very exciting new documentary. Some people have already seen it. It's called The Smell of Money, and it's about the environmental injustice that's ongoing in North Carolina. Big Ag not only harms the non-human animals, but it harms the human beings who live where these CAFOs are built. The Smithfield Corporation, which we've all heard of, controls 90% of hog production in North Carolina, and it has built these massive hog pig CAFOs right next to, sometimes behind the backyards of people who live in Eastern North Carolina, in communities that are lower income communities of color, people whose families have lived in this area for generations. And in addition to the suffering of the animals who are in those CAFOs, the health and the well-being of these human beings is being damaged by the smell, the noise, the toxic and unhealthy waste that is brought to them and brought to their homes by Smithfield. Now, after the trailer shows, Jamie Berger, who's the writer and producer of The Smell of Money, is going to talk to us about the film. Jamie had hoped to be here with us today, but for a very good reason, she can't be. The Smell of Money is making its debut in New York City, which is really exciting. And I want to encourage you, if you can, to bring this very powerful, very moving documentary for showing at your school or your office in the near future. So now, hopefully you have keyed up the trailer of the film, and I see a high sign. So yes, thank you.
So much for being here. I'm so sorry that I'm not able to join you in person. My work on the film that I'll be speaking about today has pulled me away to the other coast, but I'm so grateful to still be able to participate and so excited to be part of the Animal Law Conference. My name is Jamie Berger. I'm a writer and documentary filmmaker. My first feature-length film, The Smell of Money, is in theaters now, and I'm very excited to share a bit more about it with you and about its themes and some of the issues that it covers during my presentation today. Bit more about me first. I was born and raised in North Carolina, about 60 or so miles from an area of the country that has the highest concentration of factory farms anywhere in the United States and potentially in the world. I first learned about the pork industry in my home state when I did my undergrad honors thesis on it. I learned about its influence over the government in North Carolina. I looked at its history, the history of labor rights organizing in the state. I looked at the pork industry's impacts on the environment. and on public health. And one of the elements that I learned about during that time was this issue of environmental racism in the pork industry. And I was really struck by the disproportionate harm that the pork industry causes to communities of color and poor communities in my home state. And so this led me on a journey to become an advocate for a world without factory farming. And I had the incredible opportunity beginning about 5.5 years ago to work on this documentary. And it's been an amazing and trying and fascinating journey. And I'm excited to share more about it and the film with you today. And I'll start off by showing you the trailer. Let me just hide myself here. There we go.
They are poisoning our soil, poisoning our groundwater, poisoning people, fellow Americans. They are stealing from them in the present and stealing from future generations.
If it does not touch you in an emotional way, if you really get in to look at this issue, whether it's from an environmental standpoint, an animal rights issue, whether it's a human rights issue, whether it's an antibiotic use issue, if you can walk away from this saying, no big deal, you need to come talk to me. Let me take you for 3 days and let you sit down and talk to these people who have to live with this every day. Matter of fact, let me let you live in their shoes for a day and see if it doesn't change your mind.
No, and ain't nobody helping us do nothing. They don't care because we black. We back up in the country. I just hope my house don't get burned up tonight from talking to you. I'm sure he's somewhere peeping now. You can believe that. He got his boys on you.
What make you think you have a right to set up a hog farm and destroy my way of life? People don't have access to clean air and clean water anymore.
One of the most disturbing stories that I've heard is the sensation of being sprayed with shit, basically.
I have seen this stream filled with feces and urine from this hog operation right up here more than one time.
Almost every fish in the river died. Over 1 billion fish died in a period of about a week and a half.
Everyone that's on this road got to help faith. Every one of us, trust me.
Our health is at stake here. To raise animals in this way puts all of us at risk.
It is time that the village stand up, step up, and speak up.
If these people had lived in McMansions, it would have been a different story.
It's the power to control. That's what drives man to the end of sanity.
All the laws protect these industries. No one is protecting us.
So now that you have a little bit more information about the film from the trailer, I'd love to introduce you to our main subject of the film, our main character, Elsie Herring. She was born and raised on the land that you see here and grew up there with her 15 siblings. She moved away to New York after high school to pursue a career and came back to take care of her mother once she was older. One day, Elsie and her mother were sitting on the front porch and they started to feel these droplets raining down on them. They knew it wasn't rain though, because they could smell it and it smelled absolutely horrible. And it was actually animal waste, animal manure that the farmer next door was spraying onto their home. And this started for Elsie a lifelong journey that she pursued to try to get justice, to try to get clean air and clean water and just a safe place to live for her family and for her community. And she became an incredible advocate and a poster child in North Carolina and beyond for the fight for environmental justice. So we'll come back to Elsie, but I just want to take a step back to kind of zoom out and look at what farming looks like in North Carolina and many parts of the world today. If you Google a farm or even picture, what you think of when you think of the word farm, for many of us, this is still what we imagine, these big kind of grassy rolling hills and animals outside on pasture, red barns. But of course, this is much more, this is much closer to what the vast majority of farms look like today. This is a standard pork farm, a standard pork factory in North Carolina. And just to break this down a bit further, these are the facilities you can see here at the top of the image in which the animals are housed, and then waste from the animals is swept into what the industry calls a lagoon, which is essentially a huge open pit, just an open pit of feces and urine, antibiotics, other kinds of heavy metals and industrial chemicals. And then once that lagoon fills up, the waste is sprayed over a field nearby. And the industry typically uses these gigantic kind of industrial size sprinklers that shoot the waste out at a high volume and end up creating this kind of fine mist that can drift up to several miles downwind and lands on nearby residents' homes and property. We're talking about a lot of waste here. Waste from just 2 of these CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations, is roughly equivalent to the amount of waste that a small to medium-sized city produces. It's just an enormous amount of waste. It's almost difficult to wrap your head around. And if you were to go up into the air in a plane or fly a drone over eastern North Carolina, this is what you would see. They're extremely densely concentrated in this part of the state, which poses a problem, especially during hurricane season in North Carolina, because this is in the low-lying coastal floodplain that's prone to flooding and heavy rains. This image is from a hurricane in the 1990s that inundated farms and caused massive lagoon spills. You can see the waste here running into the rivers and the surface waters. And eventually it goes into the ocean. So this is a satellite image after Hurricane Florence in 2018, which broke all the records for flooding in North Carolina. This industry, this practice of waste management causes so many different problems for the environment, wildlife. In this photo, you can see a fish kill. Over 1 billion fish were killed in one of North Carolina's rivers after lagoon spills. And to give you another kind of sense of just how densely concentrated these facilities are, you can see here the red dots represent pig CAFOs, and the pink or purple represent poultry CAFOs. So they're extremely densely concentrated and have, as I said, the highest density of factory farms anywhere in the world. The problem with this, of course, is that many of these CAFOs are also located not only near, surface waters, lakes, streams, and not too far from the ocean, but they're also very close to residents' homes. So you can see here, there's a strip of land occupied by a number of homes and CAFOs just surrounding it. So my main question that I wanted to explore with the film, and that I've been looking at through my advocacy for years now, is how do factory farms, how do these CAFOs affect communities? And one of the ways they do is through health impacts. So a researcher from Duke studied mortality and other issues related to CAFOs, and found not only higher rates of early death in folks who live near CAFOs, but also higher rates of infections, kidney disease, cancers, anemia, lots of respiratory problems, higher rates of infant mortality. And of course, living amongst these kinds of facilities has an extremely negative impact on mental health as well. So higher rates of anxiety and depression. We also see, according to other studies, decreased property values. Of course, property near these kinds of facilities is not going to be worth as much. And then there's just so many general quality of life issues that we witnessed firsthand and experienced through the stories of the people in our film. Not being able to be outside, to open your windows, to have a party on your front yard or your backyard and see your kids run around and play without worrying about their health. And so when we talk about environmental racism, I'm, wanted to explore, why is this issue in North Carolina a textbook example of this particular form of injustice? There's a reason why we don't see this in Eastern North Carolina, massive McMansions or wealthier homes. It's not a coincidence that factory farms are located largely in poor Black and Brown communities. This is very much a product of the history of slavery and systemic racism in North Carolina. This is a map that we feature in our film. You can see the black dots represent industrial hog operations or CAFOs, and the darker red areas have the highest historical populations of enslaved people. You can see there's a pretty clear overlap there. The researchers who created that map noted this: industrial hog operations are disproportionately located in areas with high populations of poor Blacks who have been disenfranchised in a system that began during slavery and continues today in the form of racially segregated schools, housing, and job opportunities. The pork industry, the researchers say, chose these locations because of the lack of local political power and the acceptability in the dominant society of sacrificing poor Blacks, their communities, and the value of their property. So again, this is why this issue in North Carolina is considered to be a textbook case of environmental racism, which is the disproportionate harm that polluting industries cause to, in particular, communities of color. And I think it's an interesting anecdote that tells you a lot to share that. I want to share the story. The industry in North Carolina, the pork industry, was expanding rapidly in the early 90s. And it wasn't until a factory farm was slated to be built near this wealthy white community and golf resort that the state then passed a moratorium on the construction of new CAFOs. So again, I think this anecdote really highlights the kind of importance of racism and classism as defining factors in this story. And now I want to come back to Elsie and make it clear that she and her fellow community members who were fighting this issue, who were fighting for environmental justice, were not just victims of their circumstances. They were incredible fighters, advocates. Elsie led a multi-decade-long fight for justice and became an incredible community organizer. So she worked with her legislators, she held protests and vigils, she spoke at conferences, she became a spokesperson in the media. If you Google your name, you'll find hundreds, if not thousands, of interviews with her. She brought her concerns to city and town council meetings and even testified in front of the US Congress. And most recently, Elsie and approximately 500 other community members sued Smithfield, the world's largest pork company, in a 9-year lawsuit that you can learn more about in the film. When we set out to create this film, we really wanted the people who are directly impacted, who are most affected by this industry, to be able to tell their own stories and have their own voices highlighted in the movie. And these are some of the other people that you'll meet if you watch the film. This is Renee Miller in the top left. She is absolutely surrounded by CAFOs and has fought, like Elsie, for many years as an advocate for change. Then below her are some of her relatives who also spoke to us about the impacts that this has on their family and their livelihoods as well. And then in the bottom right, this is Don Webb. He is a former factory farmer who got into the pork industry during its huge rise in North Carolina and decided that he would rather make his money any other way other than spraying animal waste onto his neighbors. So he became a fierce advocate for change and went up against the pork industry and was successful. All of these folks ultimately prevail in at least one way in our film that you can learn more about. But this fight goes on. You know, in Eastern North Carolina, the pork industry is still immensely powerful, and the poultry industry is now growing as well. And so North Carolina is now the country's #1 poultry producing state. And these very areas that have been suffering the harms of the pork industry are now dealing with all of the same kinds of issues magnified because of the poultry industry's presence in the state. So I hope you'll check out our documentary and learn more about this issue. I'm excited to share that the film will be widely accessible starting very soon. So we're currently, as I mentioned, having our theatrical release in New York. We had it in LA last weekend. Other cities will be announced soon for our theatrical release, expanding across the country, hopefully, if we do well in these first cities. And then we'll be releasing the film on video on demand services in November, so you can catch it there. You can stay tuned for more updates at smellofmoneydoc.com. And just my information, in case you'd like to reach out, you can contact me here, follow the film on social media, or connect with me there as well. Want to put in a quick plug as well. If you're interested in hosting a screening of The Smell of Money, we're offering up the film as long as we possibly can as a free educational tool before we potentially sell it and won't be able to do so. So if you're interested in hosting a screening, you can find the form on our website. Again, smellofmoneydoc.com. You just fill that out and I'll be in touch with you and we can set up a screening. This could be for a student group that you're involved with or some kind of community organization, a church group, any kind of advocacy organization that you're connected with. We love to do these in-person screenings and bring people together. And as much as I can, I try to attend them and speak on behalf of the film. So thank you again so much for inviting me to participate in this today. And again, I apologize I'm not able to be there with you in person and answer your questions. That's the part I love the most. So I'm sorry to miss out on that, but I hope you enjoy the conference and thank you again.
We had a showing at Lewis and Clark in the spring, and people were really moved by this film. I know Matthew Liebman told me that they showed it at USF at his law school. So I strongly encourage people to try to bring it to your law school or to any other group that you feel is appropriate. So sorry, Jamie's not here. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Christine. And let's turn now to questions from the audience. If you have a question, please line up where those mics are, there and there. For people who are with us online, please submit your question to the icon, to the Q&A icon, and we'll take it from there. So let's give people time to walk up here. Hi.
Should I just go ahead?
Yeah.
My name is Dr. Crystal Heath, and I am the executive director of Our Honor. I'm a veterinarian, and I'm also the co-founder of Veterinarians Against Ventilation Shutdown. And I wanted you all to be aware that in Minnesota, we just had an outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza. And despite what we had heard that they were moving away from using ventilation shutdown, which is the method where they seal up barns, pump in heat and steam until the birds inside die after many hours, they resorted to that method in this recent outbreak. And on October 9th, they sealed up barns and they killed thousands of turkeys using this method. And so I'm looking for help on what to do about this. This is a method that was to be used in constrained circumstances only, and they've had another year to plan to use less barbaric methods, and they didn't. So what do we do now? And now we have also gotten new FOIA documents that show the AVMA very quickly, it was a last minute decision to make this a method to be used in constrained circumstances versus a not recommended method. So just wanted to update you from Minnesota and reach out if y'all have any questions about that. But I'd love your thoughts on this too.
Dr. Heath will be here all weekend, I believe.
Yes, I'll be here all weekend.
Yeah, so talk to her if you're interested in this issue. This is absolutely disgusting, and it's done all the time. Constrained circumstances, this is the industry's preferred method of depopulating when there's avian flu, when there is African swine fever, and both of those diseases are global. They're happening globally. And so this is a huge problem, and she has put her career on the line to try to push for the AVMA not to say that this is an okay method, which the AVMA is not willing to do. So thank you for the work you're doing, and hope people will talk with her about what they could do to help. Any other? Oh, hi.
Hi, my name is Gabriela Martinez, and I'm here with Pace Law. So my question is that I find one of the most challenging questions to answer when I inevitably enter those like daily arguments with strangers on animal rights and food is, if food producers are forced to uphold animal welfare, then the price of meat and animal products will rise. And that'll likely impact low class and BIPOC communities the most, where a pound of beef that feeds 4 costs more than a pound of Brussels sprouts sometimes. So do you have any advice on how to respond to this comment that I struggle with when I'm in these discussions?
Is this thing on? It is. Okay, good. Just checking. That's a very, very good question. I think that honestly, it's such a bigger issue than that, even because the price, if the true price of animal products was reflected at the grocery store, then it would be far, far, far higher than it is, because all of those costs are pushed onto us, and the subsidies are also, like propping up things the way that they are. But I think that this is a chance for us as a movement to do the right thing and advocate not only for making that true cost more apparent, because everybody's paying that price, right? Communities are paying that price, as you see in this documentary. It's a very high cost. So in conjunction with arguing for less animal products or no animal products, or at least making the price reflective of the true cost of animal products, we should also be arguing for food justice, to make food accessible, healthy foods accessible to everyone, especially people in low income and BIPOC communities. So I don't think, we have to build something at the same time that we're tearing something down. And I think this is a chance to do that. So I would say, we should be fully committed to that and making sure that we're doing both at the same time. Because we can't just tear down one thing and leave nothing there. So we're moving towards something, not just trying to destroy the system as it currently is. I hope that's helpful. It's probably not all that satisfying. There's a lot of injustice wrapped up in this entire system. So Joyce, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Thank you. We have a question from someone online, and Megan's going to tell us what that is.
Good morning. According to the House Agricultural Committee Chair, the EATS Act is dead. Many groups are instead asking supporters to oppose any specific language that exempts pork and chicken industry from state law. They are concerned that opposing EATS lets members of Congress off the hook because they can tell their constituents that EATS language was defeated, yet it would still contain harmful language for the animals. Can you comment on this approach?
The EATS Act is not dead. It is very much alive. It may be put into the Farm Bill. It may be narrowed, but it is not dead. It is very much alive, and it's very much something that we need to oppose. Eric.
Hey, thanks y'all for presenting this morning. This has been really insightful. This is a question for Christine. I'm curious in the context of your participation and ALDS participation in the rulemaking updates for the low carbon fuel standard. What does your advocacy look like in that space beyond publishing comments, filing petitions? Are there opportunities to be substantively involved sort of in that rulemaking process? What does that look like?
Great question. Thank you for asking. So regulatory advocacy is very multifaceted, as you kind of alluded to. So there are the petitions for rulemaking. You can do that. We definitely did pursue that to the very end. We tried really hard on that. We filed a petition for reconsideration when it was denied, and that was also denied. So one thing I would say is that this kind of change often takes a very long time, and it's not enough to just submit a petition and then let it sit there. So in addition to filing the papers, we also do a lot of talking to people who are in charge. So the board itself, there are a lot of board members on the California Air Resources Board, obviously, but there's also a distinction between the board and the staff. The staff are very committed to the wonky accounting as it currently exists. They really like their spreadsheets, that it all adds up, even though it's completely disconnected from reality. So we're talking to people who have the power to make change, and we've been doing that for a long time. But we also, we as the Animal Legal Defense Fund, our role is to provide legal support and resources to try to amplify the voices of the people on the ground there as well. So the argument that has been the most effective is the environmental injustice argument. And we have tried very hard to amplify that and to put resources behind that. our coalition partners, including Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, which is an incredible environmental justice organization in California. They're based in the Central Valley. They have a lot of residents, and they turn those residents out at hearings and make sure that they are able to speak their piece. And those hearings sometimes take days. So there's a lot of amplifying of voices that really matter, who can say, I live next to a factory farm, it got a digester, and now things are even worse, for example. Other things that we do are oppose every single application from factory farm biogas producers to profit from the low carbon fuel standard. I stopped counting a while ago. We're definitely over 100 on that. So every single application, we have gone on the record opposing it. And that does increase the burden to the industry somewhat, because they have to, in some cases, respond to our comments. So at least they have to go on the record. And we've gotten them on the record by doing that, admitting things like, of course we're consolidating. That's a good thing. It's like, not if you live next to the place where the consolidation is happening, and you want to have drinking water and things like that. So I would say that you really have to be creative in regulatory spaces, but there is definitely opportunities for anybody to participate in this rulemaking process. So you can go to CARB's website and look that up and see what's going on. We're kind of in the middle of it. It's sort of getting kicked off right now, but it's really important that they hear from folks. And even if you don't live in California, do not let that stop you, because this program, the low carbon fuel standard, is incentivizing factory farming and entrenching it across the whole country. There are factory farms in Minnesota that are participating, in New York, all the way across the country. And the reasons for that are complicated, but just know that it affects all of us. And it is definitely the driving force behind this whole trend of factory farm biogas. Thanks for the great question.
Thank you. I have to say, we're going to have to cut short questions. We have one more trailer before we break for half an hour. So if we could cue up the trailer, and as you're doing that, I will tell you what it is. My apologies to anybody else who wanted to ask a question. This trailer has to do with a film that's not out yet. It's called The Animal Thing, and it's going to introduce people to the British animal rights pioneer and theologian Andrew Lindsay, as explored by his filmmaker son, Adam Lindsay. Andrew Lindsay has been a tireless and uncompromising early campaigner for animal rights, and he's faced enormous opposition in so doing. Andrew publicly confronted the cruelty of animal exploitation back when very few other people were doing it. Through his books and his presentations, Andrew's made an undeniable impact on the modern animal rights movement. And here's a trailer for the film that will be coming out probably sometime next year that will introduce you to his story.
I have to say, being interviewed by my oldest son is not an easy experience.
You are remorseless.
You are a draconian and despotic director.
A £250,000 fellowship will allow Dr. Andrew Lindsay to spend the next 5 years studying the welfare of animals.
What the whole issue of animal rights is about is the issue of violence, you see. I believe that we're all God's creatures.
In the 70s in this country, if you were a vegetarian, you were a bit odd.
Perhaps with us, the leading exponent of the case for animal rights in this country, Professor Andrew Lindsay, who holds the world's first post in the ethics of animal welfare.
He was a very difficult person for anyone to debate against.
I can't abolish pain for you. No, but we can abolish pain for the laboratory animals.
My friends, we are winning!
Personally, I feel a total failure.
People who give you money want it to be spent on animals and not on an academic who's going to sit behind a desk for 5 years.
Do you just throw in the towel or do you fight?
Dr. Lindsay recently refused to conduct a Sunday service at the university chapel.
I don't care if you're filming.
It's a bizarre kind of story. Once you've looked at these things, you can't unsee it. The animal thing gradually took over.
The Animal Thing.
The Animal Thing.
Animal thing.
Do you like the title, The Animal Thing?
No.